We begin the day with a forced exit from power, complete with a suit and tie. Tonight in the Zimbabwean capital, Harare, the first images of President Robert Mugabe emerged since the military takeover that began Tuesday night. Mugabe is being shown off to the world, a feeble figure surrounded by the military leaders who once ensured his brutal and heavy-handed rule. Tonight, they are ensuring that he will rule no more. His future, where he will go, all of that is still speculation. What is certain, the blaming and shaming that quickly fills a political vacuum. Last night, the head of the youth league of Mugabe's ZANU-PF party went on national television to ask the country's top general for forgiveness for calling him and his forces criminals.
To please say, accept my apologies on behalf of the Youth League and myself. We are still young people, we are still growing up, we learn from our mistakes, and from this big mistake, we have learned a lot.
Now, that young man's public contrition is key to placing blame. Mugabe's wife, Grace, could quickly become public enemy number 2. She has been accused of driving a wedge between the country's youth and the military in the hopes of making it easier for her to become president once her husband steps down. So much for those transition plans. Our first report tonight takes us to the capital of a country that is still asking, who is our leader?
These images show Robert Mugabe meeting Zimbabwe's army chief and 2 South African envoys brought in to mediate at his official residence in Harare. Reports claim the longtime president is refusing to step down. But Mugabe is under pressure to resign. Zimbabwe's opposition leader Morgan Tsvangarai said the president, in power since 1980, should go quietly in the interest of the country and elections should be called.
I'm emphasizing transitional mechanism, and that the purpose and essence and nature and character of that mechanism be agreed upon by all national stakeholders. That there be comprehensive reforms for a free and a fair and a credible election to be held.
Rumours have been flying about whether Mugabe's wife Grace is with him or whether she managed to flee the country before the military action on Wednesday. Grace's ambitions to succeed her husband are said to be behind the current turmoil. Last week, Mugabe sacked his vice president. The army potentially saw this as paving the way for Grace to take over. The military's actions, though, have put a stop to her hopes, for now. The sacked Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa is tipped to head a transitional government backed by the military, an option the African Union said it wouldn't support. We in the African Union are against any violent government overthrow. I've issued a statement saying the army should retreat and return to constitutional order. We support the legitimate Zimbabwean government, and in no case will we accept the forceful seizure of power. It remains to be seen whether Robert Mugabe can hold on to his tight grip on power.
Well, the Zimbabwean author and journalist Peter Godwin joins me now from New York. He is author of When a Crocodile Eats the Sun and The Fear, The Last Days of Robert Mugabe. Peter, welcome to the day. Are you convinced that Mugabe's time is over for good?
Well, listen, once bitten, twice shy. I once predicted he was going before. I had a book that had as its subtitle The Last Days of Robert Mugabe, and that was about 8 years ago. So you never count him out till he's really down. He's a wily coyote. He's got a few bargaining chips left at the moment, the main one being that if he doesn't resign voluntarily, then the army is in a bit of a pickle because they won't be able to do this transition constitutionally, and that's what they need to happen. So I think there's still probably a bit more negotiating to be done on his exit package, but I think he's a spent force. It's possible that part of this deal might be that they'll let him see out the rest of his term, but really sort of not, in a titular fashion. He wouldn't really be, in in charge of things, but I think they'd much rather that he leave the country.
And you once said that violence has always been Mugabe's modus operandi, yet his end, his demise, appears to be taking place without violence. It's a big irony there, isn't it?
Well, without violence, although in fact there were shots fired. That it's now coming out that several of the houses of Grace's supporters in the cabinet, people like Jonathan Moyo, they used explosives to get into his house, and I think a few bodyguards were probably killed. And there's violence, and then there's the threat of violence. There were tanks in the street, there were armed men in his house. He's under house arrest. So I think there is something sort of rather fitting and certainly symmetrical about the fact that for a man, Robert Mugabe, who's used violence for political means his entire political life, that his time in office would also end at the end of a barrel of a gun.
I want to ask you a little bit about religion in Zimbabwe and how it plays into this. The General Secretary of the Zimbabwe Council of Churches issued a call for calm. Here's part of what he said.
We as the churches are calling for the formalization of a transitional government of national unity that will oversee the smooth transition to a free and fair elections. There is no way we are going to go back to the political arrangements we had in the last few days. We are in a new situation that cannot be resolved without dialogue.
Now, we know religiosity is high in Zimbabwe. 85% of Zimbabweans say that they are devout Christians. So how powerful can the church be in keeping a political crisis like this within parameters that are not violent? Well,
it's an interesting question. I mean, you're absolutely right about the religiosity in Zimbabwe. And it's my observation as a sort of foreign war correspondent that in lots of countries where there is not much hope, where people are sort of bowed down by repression, they become religious because this world isn't giving them the goods and they kind of concentrate on the next. And the church has made these calls before for peace, for calm, for no violence. For example, in the elections of 2008, and the government didn't listen to them then. The government didn't listen to them when they went down into Matabeleland, the 5th North Korean trained 5th Brigade, and killed 20,000 civilians. So there's a limit to what the church can do. And more importantly, there's a limit to the church's influence on ordinary Zimbabweans who've become very long-suffering, who are almost Pavlovian now in their response to the threat of violence. In my observation, as long as you show as a leader that you're prepared to use violence once or twice, you don't have to actually go on doing it. You just threaten it, and people understand that you're for real.
Peter, but before we run out of time, I want to ask you one other irony here in this situation. Mugabe once said that the white man is our real enemy. And yet his demise comes at the hands of his military men, the men who propped up his dictatorship for years. Do you think that Zimbabweans, do you think they see that irony?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is a man who hid behind, anything that ever went wrong with the economy or with it. He always said, oh, it's the Western powers going for regime change and sanctions was the only reason that the economy collapsed. He always had excuses for his own incompetence. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a supreme turn of irony that in the end, it's really his own comrades at arms who turn on him, with no support from the West or the outside world in particular. This is a homegrown coup. It's a kind of, it's an internal coup. It's a battle for the succession within the ruling party.
Okay, author of The Fear, The Last Days of Robert Mugabe, Peter Godwin. Peter, thank you very much. We appreciate your insights tonight.
Thank you.